Hi. So we're continuing to talk about how to integrate yourself and your communities. Last time we talked about how to integrate with your host culture, and this time we're going to talk about how to integrate with your team. So when you move cross-culturally, you're living amongst a host community that's very different from you, and the ways that you know how to be community with people, the ways you know how to live with others, no longer really all the way completely reliably apply. So last time we talked about 3 mistakes that we often see trained people make as they try to integrate with a host culture. The first is confusing cultural awareness for cultural intelligence. The first is knowing stuff about culture. The other one is being able to actually grow in your competency with it. The second was prioritizing being understood over understanding, and this most often is manifested in the way we approach language acquisition. We try to talk too soon, we focus on productive skills like writing and speaking, and we don't give enough time to listening. And then the third was refusing to subject ourselves to the forces to which our host friends are subject, using our power to insulate ourselves from life the way they experience it. There's no way to become flesh and dwell among them if we do that. But even if we can avoid these mistakes, we very rarely are serving in a cross-cultural context alone. We are usually working on a team. So this time let's talk about 3 questions that we need to be able to ask and answer in order to team well. So question 1 is, do we team? Like, should you and I be on a team, or with whom should I team? Sometimes people assume teaming, like you live here and I live here, so let's team up. But we do that often to our peril. Embracing the fact that we are all part of one family in Jesus does not necessarily mean that we're supposed to work together on something. Remember, the soccer team plays soccer and a basketball team plays basketball. They may or may not get together for coffee on the weekends, but they have in common something that they are supposed to do together. And that's what makes a team a team. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I would have just assumed that if we're in the same place doing roughly the same kinds of things, that we must therefore be a team. But I'm coming to embrace a different question now. I'm coming to ask myself, and even invite the other person to ask, what is the relationship, what gift, what is the relationship that Jesus is giving us to inhabit together? How am I supposed to be gift to you, and how am I supposed to receive you as gift? If the answer to that is teammate, then we team. Now, if you're a weird Jesus, Jedi, contemplative, mystic kind of person like this guy, that's enough clarity for you. If you're not, you might need something a little more concrete. So here's a way to think about it. We're all of us, on 2 journeys at the same time. We're on an inner journey and an outer journey. We're on a formative journey, who we're becoming, and a missional journey, the impact we're attempting to have on the world. There are callings related to each of those. You can be on a team that goes on the inner journey together, or you can be on a team that goes on the outer journey together, or a team that goes on both. But to be on a team, you need to be going the same place together. So if we think about it in terms of outer journey, because that's the most obvious and the easiest and the most familiar, there's 2 questions we can ask. Is Jesus explicitly inviting me, asking me, calling me, instructing me to team up with that person or those people? If so, if the answer is yes, conversation's over, you're on a team. If he isn't explicitly asking me to, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not supposed to team, or that you shouldn't team, or that teaming would be a bad idea. The next question to ask would be, are you attempting to accomplish in the world the same thing I'm attempting to accomplish in the world? And can we do it better together? If the answer to that is yes, you could team. Very similarly, inner journey questions can be asked. Is Jesus asking me to become whom I'm becoming, closely knit with you as you become whom you're becoming? Are you being asked to help me in my inner journey? Am I being asked to help you in your inner journey? Is Jesus calling us to become together? If the answer is yes, you're on a team. And even without something so explicit as that, if the invitations that Jesus has given you, or the streams that you've been called to kind of swim in right now within the faith, are very similar to someone else's callings for how they are being invited to become, and you guys could get there together better than you could on your own, you could be a team. A great example of that would be monastic communities, especially the Benedictines. They're not so much trying to affect an outward change in the world, but they're each inhabiting a very similar invitation to becoming something, and so they do it better together. If the answers to any of these questions are yes, you're in a great place to consider teaming. If they are not, it should be no. Teaming is a very specific kind of relationship. It's complicated with the fact that there are explicit roles and expectations that come with those roles. Just because you're friends doesn't mean you need to be teammates, and just because you're teammates doesn't mean you need to be best friends. So you need to be able to answer the question, are we supposed to team? Is this better if we do it together? Things aren't always better together. If you tie two oxen together, they pull better. If you tie two birds together, nobody flies. So once you've decided to team, you're ready for question number 2. What do we need in order to team well? What does a team need in order to be able to do the tasks of teaming well? I owe most of the meat of this next part to a book called Leading from the Sandbox by a friend of mine. In it, he suggests that when you were a kid, you could play in the sandbox. You could play with other kids. There weren't tons of rules. It was just keep the sand in the sandbox. As long as you play in the sandbox and you don't act like a jerk, everybody can be happy and can even be creative and be creative together in unique and collaborative ways. Teams should be like that. So he suggested 4 sides to a sandbox that allowed you to keep the play on the inside. Over time, as we've worked in different contexts, our definitions of those sides have evolved a little bit. So we work with 4 Ps. A team needs a clear purpose, it needs clear practices, it needs clear postures, and it needs a clear priority. Your purpose states what you're trying to do together in the world. It's like a mission statement or a vision statement, or depending on which book you read, it's both of those. It's a purpose statement. It describes this soccer team wants to win these soccer games at this particular championship. This disciple-making team is trying to make disciples of this kind in this particular place in this particular time. You want to get as clear as you can on this purpose statement, and no clearer. So the second P was practices. We don't actually get things done by articulating our values at each other all the time. Human beings change and change things by practices. It's by doing things in particular and intentional, deliberate ways. So some of our practices are we pray the hours. We intentionally pursue one another and others in our care. Something like that could seem obvious, but without that word pursue on there, we can get pretty confused and actually wait for the people that we take care of to call out for help. By then it's too late. So one of our explicit practices is we pursue the people that are in our care. So the third thing you need is postures. It's possible to do the practices badly. It's possible to have good verbs and bad attitudes about them. So your postures describe your culture, what it's like, your vibe, what it's like to be with you or to be you as you are being you. So for example, some of our postures are responsible freedom, or mutual submission, humility, teachability, things that everybody wants, but if they don't become explicit, they become forgotten. So the fourth P is your priority. What's the one thing that you're gonna do every day? You have to identify the thing that if you do it every day, you really truly believe it's actually gonna get you to your purpose. It's the thing that all of us can remember to do, even though only a very, very few of us remember the whole picture. When we lived in Central Asia, our priority statement was simple. Every day, we connect deeply with Jesus, we obey what he has said, and we talk with someone about him. At the end of the day, if those 3 things had happened, we had accomplished our priority, and we really believed that if we just kept doing that, it was very likely that we were gonna find our way toward our purpose statement. All right, then finally the third question. What do we do when it goes sideways? You have to have an explicit plan for this because it's gonna go sideways. It never ceases to amaze me how vividly we will describe what success looks like and how vague we will be about conflict. But conflict is the one thing we know is gonna happen whether or not we succeed. We know that there's gonna be some muck in the water. We know it's gonna happen. But conflict doesn't have to be catastrophic. Though it usually is, conflict could be generative. Conflicts are like virology labs where viruses are studied. They're places where diseases can be cured or pandemics can start, and nothing in between. So if conflict presents such opportunity and such danger, why do we train to it so little? Why do we role play conflict so infrequently? Hospitals have regular trainings. Some hospitals have monthly trainings where people have to put on their PPE and take off their PPE successfully a certain number of times before they can move on and go back to work. Because that point, because that crux, that moment where you put on the protective gear, take off the protective gear, is where people get sick. People we don't need sick get sick. And so since it's so important, they train to it. we talk about conflict like it's definitely gonna happen and it's really important to be peacemakers, and then we don't actually train, we just talk to it. That can't be. You've got to be explicit about how you're going to do something as important as conflict. And even more than that, we have to be explicit about how we're gonna do the things way up the road from something even becoming a conflict. Marcus Buckingham makes the point that no one is a reliable rater of someone else's performance. I could rate your performance today, and then tomorrow I could get in a traffic jam and come in and rate your performance worse, and it has nothing to do with you. It has to do with how aggravated I am about the traffic. No one is a reliable rater of other people, but we are shockingly reliable raters of how we are experiencing things. We are pretty good at saying what something feels like to us. So sometimes we kind of just have to forbear each other. There are two beautiful words in the New Testament for what we do with one another's foibles and sins. We forbear them or forgive them. We put up with them, or we talk about them and forgive them. Or even forgive them before we talk about them. What we don't do is we don't hold on to them and pack them up and pressurize them and put them in a canister and light a candle under it and wait for it to explode. So one tactic Buckingham suggests is just saying, hey, can I tell you how I react to something? When you did this one thing, I noticed that this happened inside me, and it might be you, it might be me, but I just wanted to let you know I'm kind of reacting to that. The other person isn't responsible to change their behavior. The other person isn't responsible to avoid triggering you because you are a fragile flower. But now the other person at least knows, you know what? I'm provoking that reaction, and I don't have to. I could change lanes now before this becomes a thing later. Once it becomes a thing, you have to deal with it. Simon Sinek offers a fantastic approach. He calls it FBI, Feelings, Behavior, Impact. It doesn't matter what order those three things come in. He suggests that when you have to actually confront a behavior, all three things have to be present. So when you did this, not when you do this, or you always do this, or you always say this, or when you say this, or when you have been saying this, don't root it in an infinite past that the person can't change. When you did this a minute ago, or last week when it bothered me, when you did this, I felt these feelings, and I'm concerned this could be the impact in our relationship or in our work going forward. It's so simple, and it absolutely shouldn't raise the ire of the other person. It doesn't have to be this massive intervention where we call in mediators in order to bring us to a place where we can all be equally angry about how our parents raised us to not be able to have conflict properly. We can just say, hey, when you did this thing, I felt like this, and I'm a little concerned that this could be the impact. That's all. But if we're dealing with something that is a legit sin against you, there's even an explicit instruction about that. Matthew 18. It is amazing to me how many times Matthew 18 is written in manuals for how we will do conflict and how almost no one ever follows it. If your brother or sister has sinned against you, write their boss. If your brother or sister has sinned against you, let everyone know on Twitter. If your brother or sister has sinned against you, tell a close friend and a friend that's a friend of them too, and see if the two of them might accidentally, by some magic, figure out that they're supposed to talk to the friend that sinned against you because it's really uncomfortable for you to have to. And anyway, aren't you the person that was sinned against? Why should you have to say something? You should have to say something because you follow Jesus. And if you don't want to do what Jesus said, you should consider redefining what follow Jesus means. Matthew 18 is explicit instruction about exactly how to handle sin against each other. And the reason it's so explicit is because it's gonna happen, it should be expected, it shouldn't be treated like an invitation to nuclear war, and we should follow the instructions because conflicts could be generative. They don't have to be the end of the world. All right, so when we think about teaming, we got three questions. Should I team with you? Do I team with you? Am I invited to team with you? And there's ways to think about that. What does a team need in order to actually succeed as a team? And I suggest it needs a clear purpose, clear practices, clear postures, and a clear priority. And finally, you've got to get explicit about conflict. You gotta have rules about how it's gonna happen, you gotta have descriptions about how to do it, and you gotta practice before it gets hot. All right, love and peace. Leave a comment below or a question, or let me know what needs to be developed further. Thanks.